Hello my friends and welcome to FISHTORY. Today we are going to be talking about plants, and specifically I wanted to show you guys that look, I can grow plants. I could grow way too many plants, and I have a situation, and so in this video we're going to cover my favorite tips and tricks for growing more plants, which will make you more money with your green thumb. Get it? Green thumb? Anyways, we'll grow more plants for more money, or for more plants for the sake of more plants and more tanks. You know, I got a fish room in the other room. Or just because you want a jungle out of your aquascape in your aquariums. Maybe you want to breed fish in a more natural environment. Or maybe you want to give them away to your friends, use them as compost in the garden. Because the one truth about cleaning aquariums and aquariums in general is that you can choose either to clean up the fish waste and excess food, and if you have plants, dead plants and leaves, by gravel vacuuming and water changing and doing that every week or every other week or maybe even twice a week. It really just depends on your filtration and everything. Or you can convert all that nutrients and energy and consciously think about what you're putting in the food for the fish, in realizing that it will ultimately become part of the plants and part of your substrate or soil here, and you can engineer that in the long run to be a holistic ecosystem that then grows plants like crazy with the addition of just a little bit of light. I have no CO2 on here, and I'm using no fertilizers anymore. So this is all just from light and from what I feed my fish that I grow these plants. We'll take a closer look, but I just wanted to prove the point that, yeah, I can grow plants. Now, can he cut them and make them look nice? Can he sculpt and scape them? That's what we're going to get into next with my tips and tricks of how you can make them look good, prevent the algae buildup, and how you can do things quickly and efficiently if you're tearing down a big scape that's just full of plants and material, or if you're just doing maintenance and trimming and you only have a few plants. Hopefully this will be full of information while I take care of the craziest and tangled jungle mess of a tank, or tanks, oops, that there are. Hopefully you'll pick up something that you find interesting and helpful. So let's jump right in. The tips and tricks, the hacks for making your life easier with plants in your aquarium all throughout. All right, everybody, so I need to trim this tank very clearly. I've even got plants taller than the top of the light, and by quite a bit. I've actually got things that are over the tank holding it down. This tank is definitely in no better shape either, and in fact the plants don't have enough light and probably not enough nitrates, which isn't a problem in this big tank because I've got tons of fish, including some medium-sized fish that produce a lot of waste, which feeds the plants. Alright guys, so I have been away a while, and you know, these poor fish, they need some room. Now this fish, this guy, he actually has room to swim. There's a tunnel that's been carved for him, and actually he can get around all the way to the back here, and come out back through here, but he needs much more room, obviously, and I always hear he's crowded, and these plants grow so fast that every week I need to trim them. So we're going to do something about that. We're going to take care of it. We're going to come up with an answer to how we can keep this stuff down long term. We're going to get some slower and lower growing plants in here, hopefully less of the stem plants, because we're not running CO2, we're not running fertilizers and, you know, crazy lights or anything like that. We have a decent high-powered light, a Twin Star SA light that's for a 90 centimeter tank, and other than that, it's just a good substrate. It's ADA aqua soil and fluval stratum, as well as a little bit of minerals and other things. If you want to know how I built a tank like this, or this jungle tank, which is even more out of control, you can watch my video on building a low-tech or building a holistic ecosystem. I have a number of videos depending on the style of tank you want, how deep you want your substrate, and what kind of filtration you want. But let's talk real quick before I jump in and start giving you the rundown of the tips and tricks. And let's just talk about the tips and tricks of what I'm using today. And that is, we've got all these plants growing up immersed, up and out of the water. The reason I do that is because a lot of these plants And I actually did start doing some trimming. A lot of these plants will flower, and they will have little buds and little leaves. And once they do that, then you can take a Q-tip or a paintbrush, and you can actually cross that flower with any other flower that is compatible. Oftentimes that just means another flower or plant in the genus. So like Ludwigia, Reuben, and Repens, you can cross them and make a hybrid. It will then be pollinated. It will turn to seed. The seeds will drop into your aquarium, or you can harvest them and plant them later. But in here, right now, we have already a haul of plants that are hybridized that are growing back. So we've got super red Reuben hybridized with Repens and a number of other things. So that's why it's important that I keep these. And that's also our first tip, which is you can float your plants at the top, and whether they're grown immersed, which means they're in their terrestrial form that they'd grow in a pot or on soil out of the water, or they're in their submerged form or submerged form, and they're in their aquatic state where everything's a lot more rubbery and limber and oftentimes colorful. Doesn't matter. You can float the plant at the very top, and it will suggest for you what it wants. It will turn, and the terrestrial type will probably turn upright and start growing up and out of the tank like we have going on here. And the submersed pieces will often grow down into the tank. Now, if you have high enough light, you can get even your submerged pieces to grow up and out and become terrestrial real quick. When you go to the fish store and you buy plants, oftentimes these plants are grown above water. They're called immersed. And because of this, they have better access to oxygen and gas flow of CO2, better sunlight, and they have gravity acting on them, which makes them grow very differently than when they're underwater. So sometimes a plant that has big needle-like leaves above water may have big bulky leaves underwater, or vice versa. But oftentimes when we put them in our aquarium, the leaves will become translucent, get pinholes, and do what we call melt. So check out my long form video on how to prevent melting when you are putting immersed plants into a submerged setting. And remember, you can always trim away this dead and melting material, because it's just going to cloud up your water, put organics in your water, and convert to ammonia and nitrate compounds that will continue to melt other plants nearby. But the biggest trick I have here for making one plant into many, if you're just starting with one stem, is see where all these roots are coming out? They want to feed. They are looking for nutrition because they've got all the light they could need. And what we want to do is simply take a thumbnail or scissors or whatever, and below this node, I like to do it about 1/2 inch. You can simply cut it, and as long as you're working with, 4 to 6 inches of tissue, you'll be 100% fine. It's got lots of leaves to grow new tissue, and the roots already have a jump start. But beyond that, we've got all these other little plants starting now that are basically just branches off a tree of the main plant in the first place. So just look for where the roots are, the little white stems, and cut there, cut just below them, and keep those segments, and you'll have a great time with that. This plant is a great example of how the top of the plant controls the entire plant in most plants. So the crown or top here has sent signals saying, I have tons of light. Put all your energy into the tissue up here because we have all the light and nutrients we need. Whereas down here, it actually had such little nutrients that at these little intervals where it had normally to put out leaves or stems, it said skip it, keep growing stem tissue and grow all the way up. There's only a few sparse little leaves on the stem farther down, and it used its energy to crawl through all the other plants to the top. Well, you can help it out, and when you propagate it, cut it just above this node, which is the undifferentiated cells, or at a fork in the plant, and then just replant this down into the bottom, and then it will be less leggy, a denser plant, and more colorful all the way up. Speaking of undifferentiated cells, that's what tissue cultures are made out of, and these are sterile. There is no foreign bacteria or fungi or algae or snails or any sort of pests in these tissue cups, theoretically, if they're made right. And there are a whole lot of starts in there because they use that undifferentiated tissue, just like is at the intersection in plant nodes. And then they clone that and they make a whole bunch of copies of high-end and expensive plants. Now, this is a great option if you want to have an aquascape and a very sterile, brand new style tank. But if you want a very active biotope style tank with a substrate full of little critters and very diverse ecosystem, then it may not be the way you want to start your tank. These are plants that I'm keeping, and I want to replant the ends of, the tips of, and put them back into the soil, grow them back up. Beautiful. And up here we'll have our scraps and extra pieces and things like that. Here are our immersed plants. So, a lot of people ask me, how do you grow plants immersed? Either they want to hybridize plants by flowering them and then crossing different kinds of plants, or they just like the look of it, or maybe they want to put them in a terrarium and have them ready for land use, because oftentimes they'll just dry up and die if you use aquatic plants straight into a terrestrial setting. So, what I recommend is grow your plants underwater, grow them all the way to the surface so that they're near the surface. Then they'll start putting out hormones and different signals to the rest of the plant to grow up and out of the water. If you have high light, they'll be able to do this on their own. Sometimes you need to give them a help and just literally take the crown and set it up and out of the water or tie it to something. Then it will start to tell the rest of the plant, get with the program, grow out of water tissue up here. And it will. In this vase that are going to be trimmed and maybe going to my local fish auction and the local stores. And then here we have our floating plants. But I wanted to tell you what's going on here. And I have a net. I have some scissors that they happen to have a bend in them so that you can cut grass and things that are a little bit harder to get to. And then I also have some normal scissors, but I like to just use my thumb most of all, and that's why my fingernails are usually so dirty, is we just get in the substrate on our own with our hands and get in touch with nature, get in touch with the tank. And lastly, these are pieces that are going to other tanks that need to stay in the water. But like you can see, there are other pieces that are ready to go and be cut up. But I just need to figure out what tank they're going in, how many pieces I do need. And I'm just keeping them off to the side so that I don't have to worry about finding them later. Same with like little plant starts, like this little Areocolon. Just want to make sure that I know where those things are and that I can transplant them and find them when I need them. All right, let's jump in with the Hyperlapse. So here I'm just scooping out all the stuff from the top, all the floating plants, putting them aside. Then I can either float them or toss them or sell them or whatever I want. And also it gets more light into the tank so that I can see what I'm doing. Plus all the duckweed and stuff just needs to be knocked down anyways. I'm also trimming all those tall plants and then just pulling them up by the roots and just getting rid of the tangled roots mid-water that have happened because of all the immersed plants here. And this is actually over the course of about a 2.5 hour session here. And then I'm starting to trim all the stem plants and get down there into the tank, give more light to those broadleaf plants, and working my way down through that. But let's get another tip and then we'll check back in with this process in a moment. Now, flow is very important to a lot of plants, and a lot of plants need nutrients being brought to them in the water column. You can look up low-tech or low-light plants and get a pretty good idea generally for how much nutrients they're going to process and how much fertilizer they're going to need by how much light they're going to need. Because they can only use as much light as they have nutrients to convert into tissue. So, if they're a low-light plant like these ones here, you probably don't need as much flow or as much nutrients feeding them in the water column and even in the soil. However, if you have something like a stem plant they may need much more light. They might need a lot more flow of water moving around in the aquarium so that it can distribute that nutrients, and so that the light can reach them, and so that the plants are moving and getting different angles of light throughout the day in nature. So back to the trimming, you can see I have no lid here, so it's an open top tank, and that humidity helps me grow immersed plants. Handy. If you're having a hard time getting plants to carpet or grow in loose substrate like aqua soil, like this stuff, add some sand to it, and oftentimes those fine grains will help hold down the grass or chain growing plants. Then over time, debris and fish waste will fall down into this layer, and it will actually become a rich nutrient layer for that grass. Then you can encourage to make it even thicker with highlights, trimming the grass, and if you really want, you can add CO2. All right, guys, if you want to control how dense your plants are growing, so how often these leaves occur, and even the color of your plant, it will depend on how strong the light is and how much nutrients they have. So this is the same plant side by side. This one was grown in high light, and you can see the intervals between leaves are very frequent, and it's not putting out a ton of roots. So it's putting out a root there, and it's putting out a root there, but that's about it. Now, when you grow a plant lower in the water or in lower light, there can be several inches, and this is what we call a plant getting leggy. And this happens because the plant is reaching for the light and only making bigger leaves less often and more spread out. But up towards the crown of the plant, which is where the plant is always growing and changing, it will give signals to the rest of the plant what to do based on how much light it is receiving. More light, tighter plants. Alright, so now we've cleared out a bunch of the top and middle water, and we need to take the plants that we got from this and all the little pieces and figure out how to replant and what to replant and how to trim and maintain it. So I'm going to rapid fire give you guys a bunch of info right now, but I have a whole video on how to deal with rhizome plants like Java Fern, Anubias, Bucephalandra, how to get it to grow faster and healthier in the first place. So you can check out that video, or also my video called How Come Sometimes the Easiest Plants or the low-tech plants are the hardest. And that is because they grow slow, and leaves like these ones here will be almost a year old in many cases, start to get pinholes or start to get damaged over time as little things come and clean them in the tank and subtly rip at them. And then the plant decides, all right, I'm going to take all that tissue and all the nutrients that I can get out of that old leaf, and I'm going to redistribute it throughout the plant. But it sends other signals and chemicals up through the plant and tells it to start melting or killing this tissue. And some of those chemicals can be released into the water over time. And if you got a lot of plants doing that, it actually encourages a cascade of melt going on plants. So the answer is to just simply trim or get rid of any of these pieces on plants, and they'll be a lot healthier in the long run. Over time, they can sometimes heal and grow a callus like this one and seal off, but it's much easier just to trim them, and then you don't have to deal with that. Now, the other thing is this plant has grown super leggy over a 2-year period or so. It was the size of about this that fits in between my finger and thumb, but it's grown down because it had all the light it could get up here and couldn't really go anywhere other than flowering up and out as wide as it did up here. And down below, this tuber was being stored for later, and any spot on this tuber can actually sprout leaves. So what we need to do now is get rid of some of these roots which wanted nutrients, because it had all the light it could get, but not enough nutrients to make new tissue. So we could either add liquid ferts to the tank and make sure that's distributed with things like the flow in a tank and having a power head or something like that. And the tip I'm going to give you is you can use something like a razor blade, or I actually use a scalpel, and anywhere on the plant where you get these little nodes, in between different types of tissue, like where the root and the stem or rhizome is, or where a leaf and stem meet here. These are all undifferentiated tissue, like the tissue cultures, and you can literally just take your blade and lightly score that area and agitate it, and then if you leave it in the light and float it at a new orientation, new leaves will grow. Now, another thing I want to tell you really quick about the stem plants is, yes, you can cut them and they will grow back, and they will grow denser if you replant the crown, which will be the densest part, because we talked about the bottom getting leggy and having extra root runners sticking out. But what you can also do is you can put this plant sideways and you can bury it in the substrate, and it will sprout all new plants at every intersection where roots are coming out. It has the opportunity to put up a new plant, and this will become the root tissue over time. Plants are pretty amazing and adaptable that way. Now, the last tip about growing more tissue from the same plant is going to be that if you have a stem plant or you have a carpeting plant, every time you cut it with many types of plants, it's going to then branch out into two different stems. So every time you cut it, it goes from one stem to two stems. Then that two stems, each one can be cut again a little bit later, a month later, or a few weeks later. And then that will become 4, and then 8, and then 16, on and on and on. And if you do that close enough to one another, you can get a very dense tangle where only one root's going down into the ground, but yet you've got a bunch of different pieces coming off, and you can make it as thin or as dense as you want it to be depending on what you're going for. Alright, here we come. Now, this is the home stretch. It may not look like it, but we are doing all the tedious little things that I showed you the tricks on. We're trimming the anubias, the ferns, and the immersed plants. We're cutting them so that new nodes will form and new leaves will grow, or rather roots will grow, and planting them. We are selecting pieces from down below, cutting them, cutting off the leggy parts and replanting the crowns, making space, and just really getting deep into that substrate, that mulm, all the moss and sawassertang that's grown down low, which is a great home for little fish and shrimp and little critters to graze and things. But I want some room to plant new plants. So what we'll do is we'll let this settle for a couple days, and then I'll be able to plant in the new areas, and all the plants that are there are prepped and ready to start growing thicker and more colorful when they do grow back. Remember that your broadleaf plants are actually surface area for bacteria to colonize, so it's great to have an assorted variety. Plants with big surface area, plants like these that have all sorts of little crevices, because all of those little bits of microflora and fauna, algae, and all sorts of other stuff actually helps keep beneficial bacteria and a biome, just like your stomach or just like any ecosystem would have. And that can act just as well as a filter in many cases. To quote-unquote get the most bang for your buck, layer your plants. So put your low-light tolerant plants, things like sawassertang, things like your broadleaf plants, oftentimes Amazon swords and things, put those down at the bottom. Let them spread out there. Your next layer up, your stem plants can grow in and fill in. Then beyond that, your floating plants and or your chaining plants will often fill in. Things like hydrocotyl, moneywort, or pennywort. And your most colorful stem plants you can allow to grow up, and they'll be leggy at the bottom where they don't have as much light, but their crowns will be very colorful and beautiful if they can get towards the top of the water where it has the most light. Okay, So here we're finishing it up. We're going to be clearing out the water, probably changing the filter just because it's been getting a lot of silt and debris in there, and also just going to be picking up moss, kind of rinsing it out, getting all that silt out of there. And in some cases you could use that to start another tank or actually feed a substrate, but this one has plenty of substrate going, and basically we want to settle things down. And I'd like to know how you think I should plant it, what plants I should toss in, and so forth. I'd love to hear that in the comments. And we're just about done. You guys, you did it. You made it to the end of the video, and thank you so much. It means that you are better than 70 to 90% of the YouTube viewing audience, and that I bored 70 to 90% of the YouTube audience. But if you made it this far, please consider subscribing, because I think you'll like the content I make in the future. Clearly you liked this content, or you walked away from your computer, whatever, or your cat is watching this. In that case, meow. And if you want to become a member and help me produce content like this, buy new things, try new gadgets, go places, talk to people, do interviews, do research, and focus on this channel 24/7, doing high-tech production things like coloring my thumb green for you guys, you can become a member and get access to an extra 200 episodes of FISHTORY in audio format, and they're all 10 to 20 minute shorter episodes, but there's over 200 of them now for members, and it's $1.99, and that ensures that I can do this for a living. It's like a reliable, steady income. Now, don't feel obligated, obviously, but if you want to help out, if you want to be a part of this thing, please, that's one way you can help. If you just want to help but you don't got the money to spare, I totally get it. So chime in the comments. I want to hear from you guys. What are your favorite plants? What are some of your favorite tips and tricks? And what would you like to hear me talk about in our next video? That's what I've got to say, and I will see you guys next time on FISHTORY. Have a great day, and goodbye.